Welcome to This Week in Preps, presented by the Braden Herald. I am your host, Jason Dill, and we have a new guest to the program this week. We welcome longtime celebrated local columnist Vin Mannix to the show. Vin, you've seen a lot of high school football over the years, and now we're a few weeks into the season. Who has surprised you so far?
Perhaps the only surprise is the fact that we haven't got a few more W's amongst the lower ranks of the schools in Manatee County, particularly Braden River and Bayshore High. I thought they might have picked up a win by this time.
Okay. Cardinal Mooney's really surprised me so far. The fact that they've started out undefeated. Sure, they haven't really played a whole lot of good football teams, but we're talking about a team that wasn't that great last year. Sure, they got to a district playoff tiebreaker with the district that they're in, but the fact that they've kind of had a new offense with Reese Vita at quarterback, and you know a little bit about Reese Vita.
Well, I'm good friends with his father, John, but that's one thing I'm interested in is what kind of a catalyst he's been. You know, how much of a role has Reese Vita played in that 3-0 record? I mean, is he the main catalyst?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, they obviously have Anthony Caioza back, the big running back, and they had DeMondre Patterson, another running back transfer from ODA, that gave them kind of a different look. But really, it's been the fact that they've been able to throw the ball wherever they want. He's got Elijah Tucson, another Braden kid on their team, who's been their leading receiver, and they've definitely spread the ball around. Is there anybody else that's kind of surprised you as far as how they've started out?
I would say the name of Trevon Walters from Manatee stepping in after Manatee lost all that offensive firepower last year, or some of those some of the backs. And I thought that performance he put on last week with 227 yards in total offense against Miami Central was crucial.
Yeah.
So I think if there's one name that leaps out at me, that would be it.
Okay. What about Southeast and how they've kind of plodded along in the early going? They're not as dominant as years past.
No, they're not. I saw them against Lakewood Ranch, and Courtney Allen was a workhorse in that game, has been so far this season. I'm a little... I thought they were more pedestrian than I've seen Southeast teams in the past. I thought the quarterback wasn't quite sharp that game, but they won. And I think, of course, they wiped up Sarasota Booker last week. So it's early in the season. They're still getting their sea legs. But I think Southeast is definitely going to step it up, particularly with Manatee coming to their field to John Kiker next week.
Yeah, that's always a huge rivalry game. You were talking about some of the teams early on that don't have any W's. Bayshore comes to mind as probably the most tough luck team there is, losing again last week in overtime. We'll talk about that game a little bit later. What is it about Bayshore? I mean, they seem like they get right there, but they just can't get over the hump.
Well, the coach has been there for 5-6 years now. They've been a 500 program. I think that they're probably, they got close, but I say it's probably the program. They're in a tough era because Manatee and Southeast are the Lions. And Palmetto, the Lions get the lion's share of the talent in the county, but I got to believe Bayshore gets some of that as well. Hard to put your finger on, but I'd really like to see Bayshore, assert itself and get into the playoff picture. Of course, it's early in the season.
With IMG Academies right there, and they have the football academy with Chris Wenke, I'm surprised that some of those kids that are there don't matriculate into Bayshore's program because they don't really get them. When you think about it, there's been a couple IMG kids that ended up transferring, and they're at Palmetto. We'll talk about Trent Miller last year, who went to,
exactly.
And then this year was Spencer Atkins, who was the starting quarterback before he got hurt, and Chris Tootin's taken over that role. But it's kind of surprised me a little bit about that they haven't gotten a little bit more talent. Fabian Washington played there. And
exactly, under Coach Raymond Woody back in the day.
Yeah, exactly. And the Shores just kind of slowly descended, but they just can't get over the hump. They get into these games. I think they played Tampa Catholic early in the year, had 3 fumbles. They were in that game until they fumbled the ball away 3 times. And, as a coach, you can practice ball security, but when it's in the game, it's on the kids. If you can't hold on to the football, you're not going to beat anybody. So we'll be right back with more high school football coverage in just a moment. There were a couple close games last week involving Manatee and 2 other county teams. Vin, what really stood out to you last Friday night?
Well, Manatee's ability to trade blows with a good team, a good young team from Miami Central. Manatee has lived up to the hype as far as being the #1 team in the country in several polls, #1 team in the 7A poll. Miami Central, good. Big scoring offense, a lot of skilled people at the wide receiver spots, quarterback who could throw the ball all over the field. Even though the final score was 44-34, I believe. They put the Manatee defense under pressure. Even though they scored 34 points, I thought the Manatee secondary made a couple of key plays early in the game. That kept Central from knocking down the door. Second half, different story. Put together a couple of long drives, but then Manatee answered. And that's where I think this kid, Trevon Walters, really showed what he's capable of, especially the 85-yard run, that put the game, essentially, I guess, put the game away. But I think, Manatee's won blowouts. They were in a firefight last week, for lack of a better term. We're going to have to see what Manatee can do in a real knockdown, drag out, close scoring, say 14-13 game. That's going to happen at some point in this year, probably, most likely in the playoffs. But I was impressed by the way that they were able to, trade blows with a good young team.
Yeah, it's one of those grinded out type of games that we were talking about off the air before the show. It'll be interesting to see how they did. We saw them last year. They were able to come through in those games, beating Fort Pierce Central and a Dwyer team, real close
Correct.
games before they got, obviously, to the state championship game, which they won going away against
Correct.
Jacksonville First Coast. It'll be interesting to see with Manatee going forward. They don't have a whole lot of games when you look on their schedule, teams that on paper can even match up with them. So it'll be interesting to see, does Manatee lose focus a little bit? Probably not with Joe Canan as the head coach. He's always got them ready every Friday night. With Miami Central, though, I know Canan was talking about it after the game, how athletic Miami Central was. That's probably the most athletic team that Manatee's played all year and probably will play all year. And it was kind of interesting to see how Central just, for lack of a better term, maybe if they had a little bit better coaching, they might have been in that game. I don't know if that's what you saw, but it seemed like athletically they were right there with Manatee all the way.
They were dangerous. I wasn't paying attention to the coaching, but the players they had, they were dangerous. They were dangerous. Going down the way, there's only one game I think that matters at this point. They all matter. It would be Venice, and that's at Venice. And I don't know, regardless of whether Venice stacks up physically or matches up against Manatee, they're playing there. It'll be an emotional game, and Manatee has beaten them the last 3-4 years running. That's going to be a one-game season for Venice, so they're going to be, they're going to be playing over their heads. And Manatee knows. It's the district is essentially it's a one-game championship.
Sure.
So that's the one that's going to count the most. Going undefeated the rest of the way, I'm not that hung up on this whole #1 in the nation thing. Getting to the state championship is what's paramount.
Okay. Yeah. What stood out to me though was, it's easy for me. I was at the Palmetto game, so it's easy for me to say Palmetto's defense against Braden River, holding them to 47 yards of total offense. We'll get to them later on. But what really stood out to me was Bayshore, Lakewood Ranch, overtime game, getting really close, and Bayshore just coming up short again. Being down 14 points in the fourth quarter to rally, to score, to tie it, and go to overtime. Sean Trent's a good coach. I think that's kind of overlooked too in the county, that Sean Trent only having a couple guys back from his team last year on offense, and somehow, some way, they've got 2 wins in the season already, losing a close one to Southeast. And we talked about it last week on the program that Sean Trent can coach his kids up. I want to spin things forward a little bit. What's your game of the week?
My game of the week, would be Arcata DeSoto at Palmetto. District opener for those teams. And DeSoto's undefeated, so is Palmetto. And Arcata is one of those programs out in the backcountry that has they've got a lot of athletes. And Palmetto has not. They've won a blowout last week. Have they been challenged yet this season in terms of a close scoring game?
Yeah, the first week of the season playing against Riverview. Riverview had a chance with Dominic Marino, Dave Marino's nephew.
Got it.
Had a chance and a couple key interceptions. Otherwise, that game might be going a different way. Of course, they also lost their starting quarterback and tailback in that game, and they were kind of playing with, a little wounded in the second half. But that game was really close. And then the Sarasota-Palmetto game was also really close until the fourth quarter when it was 33-28, and E.J. Burston has a couple touchdown catches to put the game to bed. But those two games were real close, but those are bigger programs.
Right.
They're playing a DeSoto team that's the same size as them. DeSoto's coming off a victory against Frostproof, which is a really good program, but it's a 3A school, so a little bit smaller in depth and whatnot. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. DeSoto's they're very cyclical. They're usually up and down, up and down. This might be one of those years where they have a decent team. I still think Palmetto's going to win that game. My game of the week, I'm going to go a little bit outside the box. I'm going to say the ODA Naples St. John Newman game. ODA's got that game at home. It's a home opener for them. Last year, they went down to Naples, lost to St. John Newman by 5, and then they went on a little losing streak in their district. It's a district game for them, just like Palmetto and DeSoto. But for them, it's a key game because they're coming off a loss against Moorhaven, and most of the teams are 1-1 in that district. You lose 2 games in that district, even though there's so many teams in, you're not making the playoffs. So it'll be interesting to see. What about your lock of the week?
Lock of the week, sorry to say, is going to be Bayshore High at Wauchula Hardee. Wauchula Hardee is a tough place to play, and we want to see the Bruins get their first W, but it's not going to be this weekend. I just think it's too tough. It's too tough a place. If they win there, God bless them. I know, but Wauchula Hardee is a tough place to play, as Palmetto can tell you, and they're going to have to travel there in a few weeks.
Yeah, and that's basically that district we mentioned already DeSoto and Bayshore. But when you talk about Southeast, Palmetto, and Hardee, it's really a 3-team district for 2 playoff spots. They're all pretty good teams, Southeast, Palmetto, locally. But Hardee last year, they were a kick away from beating Palmetto in the regular season, would have sent Palmetto not even in the playoffs. And then they played them again in a rematch in the second round of the playoffs and played them pretty close as well for a while. So, and Hardee, we've talked about it, that's old Florida football, old Florida high school football, and it's a tough place to play. Yeah. So when we come back, you'll find out who we chose as the players of the week. We have a new offensive player this week. Palmetto's Corey Crawford was our choice the past 2 weeks, but another running back had his second straight dominating performance to gain the honors this week, and that's Southeast Courtney Allen. Vin, what have you really noticed about Courtney Allen and his importance to Southeast?
If this kid was 6'2", 6'1", instead of 5'6", 5'7", I mean, he'd be illegal. The kid's a workhorse. He's essentially a one-man gang. He has dominated Southeast offense, which usually has a lot more weapons, but he seems to be Coach Paul Meckley's go-to guy. Punched up 197 yards last week, I guess, 2 weeks ago.
Okay. 2 weeks ago, and then he had 175 yards rushing last week, but 164 of those came in the first half when the game was already put to bed. I mean, it's hard to gauge. We were talking about Booker as a program that is in really disarray, losing a couple coaches. Longtime head coach Fred Gilmore gets fired, and then they have a new coach who's in there for 50 days before he decides to depart. So
15 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of hard to gauge how important Courtney Allen is, or how big of a performance it was. But he's an important and integral part because he was pretty much the only thing that was working for them against Lakewood Ranch, and they won the game 12-7. So going forward,
I think Southeast is going to. Paul's a Hall of Fame coach. They're going to have to develop some other weapons to give, because people are going to be keying on Courtney Allen as they have already. You take him away, what else does Southeast have? And I know Southeast has got the athletes, to counteract that. But Courtney's the real deal.
Sure. Normally we pick a defensive player of the week, but I'm going to go with a unit this time. The Palmetto defense. They held Braden River to negative minus 18 rushing yards, 47 yards of total offense. 28 of those yards in the passing game came on the last series of the game when all the starters were out. Josh Leahu, who's a senior captain on the defensive side of the ball, who was their leading sack guy last year as a junior, he laid down the challenge that they were going to pick up the slack because the defense has been a question mark the first 2 weeks of the season for Palmetto, and they came out firing. Sure, it's against Braden River, but that's a 7A program that they held to 47 yards of total offense. That's pretty impressive.
Mm-hmm.
So
Definitely.
a quick note on boys golf. The Lakewood Ranch Mustangs fell for the first time this season. They went 103-0 and winning the Class 2A state title last fall and started 13-0 this year before finishing in third place in a tournament this last weekend. Quite a streak indeed. But that will do it for this week. Remember to email us any video links you feel worthy as play of the week. That email address is sports@bradenton.com. So tune in every week right here on Manatee Educational Television and check out the Bradenton Herald for all the latest news in high school sports. This is Jason Dill saying goodbye for Vin Mannix.